can you tell us a little bit about who you are and about you?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Sonya. I'm a physician assistant student at the University of Calgary. I am from Ontario. I'm from a small town called Stouffville, Ontario. I moved to Calgary to start the Master of Physician Assistant program at the University of Calgary. For my medical experience, I've worked in a variety of healthcare settings, including family medicine, optometry, some internal medicine. I also have some volunteer experience at a hospital where I did my undergrad, and I did my undergrad at Wilfrid Laurier University in biology and psychology.
Great. How did you first hear about the PA profession?
So I heard about the PA profession back in 2018. I was actually completing a course at Wilfrid Laurier University called Health Issues, where they went over different health professions in Canada. And that's when I first heard about the program, and I was really interested in it. So I started looking it up. I first came across U of T, I came across McMaster, I came across your page. And then from there, it was just a matter of finishing my undergraduate degree and applying.
Okay. And were you considering other careers or professions apart from PA?
Since I was in my first year of undergrad, I actually wasn't considering anything. I kind of went into first year with a blank mind, and I wanted to see where I saw myself ending up and giving myself a variety of options to choose from. So when I was in my first year, I didn't really have my mindset on anything. And when I heard about the PA profession, I was like, okay, this is it. And everything I do moving forward will be to ensure I'm meeting all the requirements for PA school, whether that's healthcare experience, specific courses, or anything like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because the majority of people that I've met as pre-PAs or who are currently PAs don't find out about it until they're in their third or fourth year of undergrad.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah,
interesting that you were pro PA from the get-go.
yeah.
It's fantastic. What specifically about the profession drew you to PA?
I think for me personally, it was a lot of my family experience. So when my family and I first immigrated to Canada, we were a part of that group of people who couldn't find a family doctor, couldn't get into a practice, were on waiting lists all over the city. And I really saw how the barriers in the healthcare system affect everyone. And I was just a young kid at the time, but my parents were like struggling to find places to make sure I was up to date with my vaccinations in order to be vaccinated for school and all the stress that it caused them. And I was like, I want to be in a profession where I can break down these barriers. I know there's a shortage of many healthcare professions out here in Canada, but the PA profession specifically, I saw bridging a lot of those gaps. While it could be reducing wait times, giving more time for the patient to speak to a provider, and just allowing our healthcare system to break down those barriers one at a time.
Yeah, that's incredible. So it really is from your perspective as a patient uh,
Yeah.
that have really helped frame that.
Mhm.
Did you have an opportunity to shadow or speak to PAs prior to getting into PA school?
Yes, I did. I did two shadowing experiences. It was during COVID, so both were virtual. So I got to do two virtual shadowing experiences with two PAs, one that was trained at U of T and one that was trained at Master. So those were really fun and exciting to be a part of. And then I also did a lot of like online shadowing through like videos, whether that was through your page or other people's Instagram or social media profiles. I was really able to kind of get a grasp of what PAs do in Canada.
That's fantastic. And so, can you just remind us what you did your undergrad in? And
Mhm.
if you don't mind sharing some stats, and a little bit more about your experiences, extracurriculars. Yeah.
So I did my undergraduate degree at Wilfrid Laurier University. I double majored in biology and psychology, and then I also did a minor in chemistry. And when I was in my last year of my undergrad program, I actually did a thesis or a research project. So that was really exciting to be a part of for the full year of my last year and getting some hands-on research experience and working under a professor. I was also heavily involved in extracurriculars as I am now too. I've always had a passion for joining school clubs. So I was a part of the Laurier Biology Association and Laurier Against Childhood Cancer. And I also attended CUCO, which is the Canadian Undergraduate Conference on Healthcare. So those were all really fun, exciting things that I joined in my undergrad. And in terms of stats, so the University of Calgary only looks at your last 2 years of your undergrad or your last, I guess each school has a different rating scale, but your last 10 classes or your last 20 classes, depending on how your school calculates them. So for my last 2 years, I actually had a GPA of 3.7. So I know Calgary doesn't put a huge emphasis on GPA only. They look at a holistic picture, but that was what my stats were for my last 2 years, which is what Calgary looks at.
How do you think your extracurriculars or the activities you were involved in outside of academia like helped you become a competitive candidate for a PA school?
So when I first joined these clubs, it was in my first year, and I wasn't really sure where I saw myself going. But I knew by joining these clubs, I would be able to meet with other individuals and also network with other people who may end up being my colleagues or applying to the same programs or whatever it may be. So when I was in the Laureate Biology Association, I actually met a lot of pre-med students, people who are applying to medical school, dentistry school, nursing school. And it was really exciting and fun to be a part of it. And while we were all there because we genuinely had a passion for biology and creating all these events for first years, second years, being a mentor and all those things, it was also really nice to be a group of individuals who were kind of going down the same path as me and wanting to get involved and also using that involvement to increase their skills, whether that's like leadership skills, communication skills, collaboration skills, all of those things I found helped me be a more competitive applicant because I not only was able to display those skills in my application, but I also had those years of experience on my resume or CV or whatever it may be.
I find that communication piece is a little bit harder to develop in a
Mhm.
short period of time. So it's good that you started from the very beginning. Which PA programs did you apply to, and how many attempts did you have?
Yeah, so this was actually my third application cycle. I applied to University of Toronto, McMaster University, and the University of Manitoba in my first application cycle. And then moving forward for the next two application cycles, I ended up only doing U of T and U of M, and then, of course, U of C, my last cycle. And I also applied to the States. I applied to two or three schools during my last cycle as well. So it's nice that I ended up at UFC. I feel like everything worked out how it was supposed to be. So I'm really happy to be here. But I did do three application cycles.
And there are a lot of pre-PAs in our Facebook group and in general that haven't been able to get in their first cycle. So would you have any advice or
There's actually quite a bit of people in my class who did more than one application cycle, which may be shocking to hear about UFC since it's only its first year. But there are a lot of people in my class who did apply to the other PA schools in Ontario and Manitoba and did do more than one application cycle. So I think for me, initially, not getting accepted in my first cycle was very heartbreaking. It was very daunting to even apply again because I was just under this impression that, I did my undergrad and now I apply to graduate school and I get accepted. That isn't always the case. It was a really difficult pill for me to swallow. And I think connecting with other pre PAs is what really got me through it. I'm a part of every Facebook chat, every Instagram chat, every chat there is for the pre PAs in Ontario or Canada. And I was just speaking to a bunch of pre PAs, and I was in my fourth year of my undergrad, and I was like, I'm so upset I didn't get in. And everyone's like, that's really normal. And I also didn't get in, or I did get in, or I'm on the wait list. And I think just normalizing not getting in on your first cycle was like very important for me. And now that I am in PA school, and it did take me three cycles, and when I first applied, I was like 22, and now I'm 25, is really happy I started the program at 25. I feel like for me personally, it gave me the maturity I needed. It gave me the independence I needed to move across the country. So at the end, everything did work out how it's supposed to be. And if you get in on your first cycle, that's great. And if you don't, that's also great because you always have more time to add on to your application. And for me personally, in between my applications, you can see the major growth in healthcare hours. I also went back to complete some extra courses to boost my GPA where I can. I was able to do the Casper again when I reapplied to Manitoba and when I also applied to Calgary. So there's always pros and cons and everything, but I tried to look at the glass half full when it came to not getting accepted in my first cycle.
that's fantastic. I mean, when I had applied to PA school back in 2011, there were only 150 people competing for 24 spots.
Yeah.
And those stats have changed as there are
Mhm.
more spots in PA school now and more
Mhm.
programs, but there's a little bit more awareness about the profession. So
Yeah.
that's been exciting. So how far did you get in each of the attempts, and how did you like apart from your experiences and your GPA, like how did you work on the soft skill piece, like the writing and communication?
Yeah, for sure. So the University of Calgary was actually my first interview. So that was also a little bit nerve-wracking because I felt like everything was only riding on one school because I know some of my friends were in the program and just some other pre-PAs and PA students that I've talked to in the past had one or two interviews or all four interviews lined up for them. So this being my only interview was a little bit daunting because I've had no interview experience prior. But again, these were like soft skills that I did grow throughout the years. So a lot of it did come through my undergraduate experience, doing my thesis, presenting a project in front of a bunch of professors, being the president of the Laurie Biology Association. I was always doing events hosted for 50 to 100 people. So I really got comfortable with public speaking, which I feel like was really important for the interview and just working on some other skills that were important to me for the interview. I did do a lot of prep. I think we had about a week's notice or more for the UFC interview this year. And so I did spend every single day leading up to the interview practicing with my camera, practicing with PA mentors, practicing with other PAs, pre-PAs for a few hours every day, just to get those reps in and really practice to make sure I could be as successful as I could be.
How did you feel when you got the acceptance?
I was really excited. It's actually a really funny story because I think all the schools went out on the Friday. And so UFC did kind of tell us that it would probably go out on the same day as the other Canadian schools, which is what I was expecting. So after my interview, which was on the Sunday, I had about 5 days leading up to the Friday, and those were the most anxious days of my life. And I think everyone in my class agrees that like we all sort of just blacked it out. And so we actually all got our acceptances on Thursday night, which I wasn't expecting at all. So I wasn't home. I was actually driving and I got an email from the University of Calgary. I was like, I have to pull over and read this. So I like pulled over to the side of the road and I read it and I couldn't drive. Like I just was like, I have to sit here because I'm way too excited. And it was honestly probably like one of the happiest days of my life. Like I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I think even getting it on the Thursday night when I was expecting it for the Friday was even more exciting because I was like, wow, I didn't see this coming. So I actually went home and I surprised my parents with like PA balloons. And so it's a really fun day and it's a great experience.
That's fantastic. And especially since you've been working towards this for so many years,
Hmm.
it's it's something else. So
Yeah.
that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. And I can see your face like light up when you talk about it. So what was your experience like being an out of province applicant and then starting PA school in Calgary?
I'm not too sure exactly the stats. So for anyone watching this, I think you could look it up at the UFC website for the physician assistant program for more specific details. But I don't believe the UFC gives specific number of seats for out of province students. It's kind of just like random to us, at least. I don't know if they have something on their end. So applying, I actually didn't know how many seats there would be for out of province students, but I did know that there were quite a few people from Ontario and other provinces applying. I kind of just sent my application in regardless of knowing how many seats there were for out of province students and sort of hoped for the best. And then when it did come for the time to move and when I got my acceptance, I did have a couple months to prepare before, but it was obviously a bigger move than if I were to go to like McMaster or U of T. So it was sort of like securing an apartment that was close to the school, figuring out my flights, figure out how I was going to move all my things from Ontario to Alberta. It was a pretty big move. I've never been this far from my family, so that's still something I'm like openly struggling with to this day. But other than that, everything else has been going super well.
That's great. I can't imagine myself moving out of province. So it's
Yeah.
huge because PA school is like a big transition, and then to add
Hmm.
like this huge move, it's
Yeah.
it can be tough. I'm sure
Hmm.
like I'd be homesick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mind going over what the admissions process is like at Calgary?
Mhm. So at the U of C, the admission process is a little bit different from the other schools, and I can kind of go over what those differences were. So the first thing is your GPA. As I mentioned earlier, they only look at your last 2 years. And so it's really important to make sure that when you are submitting your application, you are calculating your GPA based off your last 2 years or whatever that equivalency is to your last 2 years. And so I made sure to go over that a few times before I did submit my application because they did expect some Excel sheets that had all your last classes and the marks and the GPA calculation for that. They do go over that on their end as well, but that is something that I submitted as part of my application. They also require the Casper, which is really important if you're planning on applying because I think the last day for the Casper for this cycle is like the end of January. I actually applied to University of Manitoba, so I already had my Casper done when the U of C application cycle opened. So I just used that same score from Manitoba for U of C. They do require patient care experience. It wasn't required to be paid or volunteer. There was no specifics. I had both paid and volunteer. So that was also a great thing to already have out of the way was my healthcare experience. And then they also require two reference letters. I'm not too exactly sure on the specifics of the reference letter, but I had a supervising physician and my professor who I did my undergraduate thesis with write my reference letters. I believe those were all the requirements. Once I did get accepted, I had to complete an Indigenous course prior to starting the program at the end of August. So that's something I did in July and August before I started, which a lot of my other classmates did as well. And then that was all the requirements for my application cycle for the class of 2026.
And for those that aren't familiar with it, what is Casper?
Yeah.
And how, oh yeah, okay. So what is Casper?
So Casper is an assessment tool that a few PA schools use out here in Canada, and I believe a lot of schools actually use it in the States as well. It is a test that you complete at home, and it's more so to get a grasp of your morals and values and who you are as a person and how you would use those skills and those attributes in various settings. So the test itself, I don't know if I would call it a test, it's more so an assessment. It had both text answers and video answers that we were prompted to answer, I believe, in a 1.5 hour setting, if not more or less. And it went through, I believe, 10 to 12 stations. There was some rest stations in between. And I know U of C, all the students who did get accepted did complete the Casper because it is a requirement. So it's really important if you are planning on applying to U of C to get that done.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very helpful. And um, did you do very similar preparation with Casper in terms of the practicing that you did for the interviews?
So I'm actually someone who did the Casper 3 times because this is my third application cycle. So
That's
I did
fair.
the I did the Casper for my first application cycle to U of M, again, the second time for U of M, and this time for U of M and U of C. And so the first Casper application cycle, or the first Casper assessment, I actually did about a month's worth of prep. So I would practice every day with both written answers and video answers and with other pre-PA students for about a month before my Casper. And then for my second and third Casper, because I already had the first one and I kind of had an idea of how it all went and my confidence in the assessment, that I just prepped just a few days before. And then because I already had the experience of writing it twice, it was really fine this time.
That's wonderful. So even with the reapplication cycle, at least you're familiar with the format, and that helps in future
Yeah,
applications.
no, for
Uh,
sure.
Wonderful. Do you have any advice on how pre-PAs can approach getting strong references for PA school?
Yeah, for sure. So this was relating back to joining the biology club. So when I was in my first year and I was surrounded by all these upper year students who were applying to med, dentistry, nursing, and all these different programs, they were telling me how important it is to get involved not only for having that experience, but also connecting with professors, connecting with supervising physicians, connecting with other healthcare providers who you can build a relationship with in order to get these reference letters. I think for me personally, because of my healthcare experience and working in different settings, I had a few options to choose from when it came to applying of who I wanted to write my reference letter for. And I found that really beneficial because I know there are certain instances where you may have only worked at one clinic, so you kind of only have that one doctor to ask for your reference letter. And if that's the case, then I would make sure to be honest and be open with whoever you're asking your reference letter for as early as possible. I think throwing this on an individual at the last minute, it's not easy for them and it's not easy for you for your application cycle too. So both my thesis professor and both my supervising physician, they both were aware I was applying to the PA program. They knew I applied before. They had an idea that I may ask them to write a reference letter. And then when it came time to it, I think because they wrote my reference letters for U of T and U of M as well as U of C, I asked them back in September. And I don't think many of these applications were due until January, and U of C was due in March or April. So I gave them well in advance notice. And I made sure that the individuals that I were asking to write my reference letters were people who had known me for X amount of time, people who can speak on my healthcare experience, speak on my academics, and speak on me as an individual, not just a number in their course or not just a person at their clinic, but someone they worked one on one with individually for a number of hours or years or whatever it may be.
So not just someone that confirms that you worked at this place and had this
Yeah, for
experience,
sure.
knows you a
Yeah.
little bit more personally. When
Yeah.
you did approach them, did you provide any additional information apart from here's the link for the reference?
Yes, I did actually. So for my university professor who wrote my reference letter, I provided them with my transcript because I felt that that would be beneficial for him to be able to speak on my academics as well as my experience in his lab. And I also provided him with my CV. So he kind of had an idea of my healthcare experience outside of school as well as with my extracurriculars. And then with the supervising physician who wrote my reference letter, I provided her with my CV. She didn't ask for my transcript or anything like that, but I think it's good to have those tools um, easily accessible just in case they do request them when writing your letter. I think providing them with as much detail as you can or as much resources as you can would just make for a better reference letter because they can speak to you on a different aspects, not just healthcare, not just academics, but the whole picture.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good advice. Preparing them to give you the best version of a
Yeah.
reference that they can. So now you're in Calgary, you're a first year student, you're a couple months in. When did your school year start?
So we started August 26, 2024.
And what has it been like being in the Calgary program?
It's honestly been amazing. I think my friends and I and my classmates and I, like every day, we're like, wow, I can't believe I'm in PA school. This is something a lot of us have been working for years. Myself, a lot of my classmates, we've been wanting to be where we are today for like 4 or 5 years. So it's just kind of surreal to be here right now. Being in Calgary alone is really surreal, but then being in a program where I've worked so hard for after all these years is like the most rewarding thing I could have got out of life so far. So it's honestly been so amazing. I can't put into words how happy I am to be here and how great the experience has been. The University of Calgary program, the faculty, the professors we have come speak to us, our preceptors, our lab, our shadowing experience, like everything has just overall been so great. I have nothing negative to say about it because it's everything I could have wanted and more.
Fantastic. So can you give us an overview of what the structure of the program is like?
So I think a big thing that I wowould have wanted to know as a pre-PA is actually how the curriculum of these different schools are, because I know every school is really different. U of T being more online, McMaster being a lot of small group learning. So with U of C, for those of you who don't know, it is a spiral curriculum, which means we work on a different disease or different diagnosis every single week. And so I really love the spiral curriculum. And now being at U of C, I can't imagine myself being at any other school because of how much the spiral curriculum works for me. And so, for example, this past week, we worked on care for the elderly. That was our theme for the week. So we learned about osteoporosis, we learned about falls, we learned about frailty. And so what our weekly schedule looks like is Monday, Wednesday, Fridays is more of our big group, large lecture learning. So we have fundamentals in the morning where we have different doctors, different professors come in and speak to us about these different topics. So we had an endocrinologist talk to us about osteoporosis. We had a geriatrician talk to us about frailty and falls. And so we have those lectures every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoons, we have foundations, which is from 1 p.m. to around 4 p.m., give or take a couple hours. And so foundations goes over everything else in the PA profession. So it goes over the ethics, what it means to be a PA, how we can work on our contract with our supervising physician once we've graduated, and shadowing experiences. It kind of ties everything in together and what it actually means to be a PA outside of the knowledge of medicine. So I really do enjoy that course as well. And then on Tuesday, Thursdays is a lot of our small group learning. So we're put in two different small groups. We have one small group for Tuesday, Thursday mornings and a different small group for Tuesday, Thursday afternoons. There's only 20 of us in the class, so our small groups are only 5 of us, which is actually really great to work with 4 other individuals at a time. So in the mornings of Tuesday, Thursday, we have clinical skills as well as sim lab. So we actually go in and we have a standardized patient. And this week we were doing a elderly assessment on them or a geriatric care assessment on them. So we did the cranial nerve exam, we did a history on their falls, we had someone taking a soap note. So it was really cool to like tie all those aspects in together. And then on Thursday, we have our simulation lab where we had a patient showing up to the emerge after a fall. And so we got to work through that case, the 5 of us. And then Tuesday, Thursday afternoons, we have small group learning where we go over the fundamentals lectures. So on Tuesday, we went over what we learned on Monday, and on Thursday, we went over what we learned on Wednesday. So it's really nice to go over a case and actually apply our knowledge from those lectures into a real patient.
That's fantastic. That's very different than the didactic style that I guess we're used to in undergrad, where
Mm-hmm.
there's you're not really revisiting topics. At least at Max PA program, it's medical foundations one, two, three, and then you cover specialty by specialty, and
Oh, okay.
you don't necessarily revisit it. So this idea
Oh,
of the spiral curriculum, I suppose. It sounds like you cover a
mm-hmm.
lot of topics, then circle back to it in a different context. So
Yeah.
how do you study for that, and how deep are you going into the study materials? Like, do you look up your own
Mm-hmm.
resources, or is there more guidance from the faculty?
So my studying skills have definitely changed from undergrad. That was like the biggest learning curve I've had so far while being in K school, just because the amount of content that is being thrown at us. So I remember when I was a pre-PA, I used to always see this meme where it was like you drinking water out of a fire extinguisher, that or a fire hose. That is exactly what it feels like, because there's some weeks where our program does provide us with all the readings, all the textbook readings, supplemental resources, as well as lecture content. And then we have the clinical skills, and it feels like a lot. And then there's other weeks where they don't provide us with as much resources. And so I find myself going and trying to find these resources on my own. So regardless, there's a lot of reading for PA school, which I don't know why I didn't expect that coming in. I just didn't realize how much reading there would be. For me personally, I use a bunch of different study tools. So if this isn't you, that's totally fair, because I think everyone's studying goals are very individualized. Like I study a different way than my classmates. And so I just kind of am figuring out what works for me. And I really did give myself the first semester to figure out what works out for me best, and then to apply that to the next 2 semesters. And I feel like now, because I'm on my last week of PA school, I can really say I've mastered what I've learned so far. So early on in the program, I did use Anki. That is a tool that a lot of medical students and a lot of other medical professionals use for studying. And I did find it beneficial for the first few weeks, which was cold ENT or GI week, because it was a lot of memorization of concepts. And so I found Anki a beneficial tool to use for that repetition of knowledge and seeing what topics I still need to work on. And then moving forward, the week after that was electrolytes. So I was like, okay, for me personally, Anki is not going to work for electrolytes. So I need to move on to something else. And so that week I was using Quizlet. And then a couple weeks after that, I started making study maps and summary maps, and that started working out really well. And so I kind of just see what our theme is for the week and what tool I feel like would be most beneficial. The past few weeks, I have been using my flow charts or my summary charts, and I use Canva, I use pen and paper, I use my iPad, I use GoodNotes. So I use a number of different tools on what I think would work best for the week, but there are a variety of resources that you can use for PA school, not only what the school provides you, but what you also use on your own. And so for me personally, I do what works best with this week's theme. And that's like the best part about the spiral curriculum. When we had our altered level of consciousness week a couple weeks ago, and we went over dementia and delirium and a lot of other care for elderly aspects, I already had my summary and my flow charts. So when it came to this week, I just had to go get those notes and, touch on them again and apply what we learned this week. So that's what works best for me so far.
Love that. This idea of sort of mind mapping or visualizing. I love that you use
Mhm.
Canva.
Yeah.
And I've noticed a lot of PA students actually do have iPads.
Yeah.
Is that a tool that you use, or do you primarily like to use your desktop or written notes?
So I am an iPad user, but there are so many people in my class who are strictly a laptop user. There's other people in my class who are only a pen and paper user. So there are all different types of learning tools and skills that people in my class use. I think going into PA school, I thought I needed an iPad. I wouldn't be able to survive PA school without an iPad. And I thankfully already had one before starting. And so I did bring it, and it's been so beneficial for me personally. I really enjoy using it for clinical skills specifically because I like being able to write my SOAP notes and just using it in that context, and then using my laptop in actual lectures to be able to type notes faster. But I think it really just depends on what works for you. And you definitely don't need an iPad to be successful in PA school.
That's fair. So what app do you use for your note taking or for your soap
I
notes?
Yeah, I use GoodNotes. I really love GoodNotes. I like the way that everything is organized. We have three major courses, which is fundamentals, foundations, and clinical skills. So I just have them organized by the course, and then I have them organized by the week. And so because this week was care for the elderly, I was able to go back to my ALOC week, find those notes, move it all into this week, and everything just works smoothly for me personally on GoodNotes. So I really like using GoodNotes.
Wonderful. And for exams, like I know with medicine, it's a bit hard to do just repetition and
Mm-hmm.
memorization. It doesn't always
Mm-hmm.
necessarily work out. So,
For sure.
how do you prepare for those exams?
Properly. So at UFC, we have weekly tests every single Friday, and it's more so to make sure that we're on top of the content that we learned that week than assessing our grade. It's kind of used as a tool to make sure we stay on top of what we're learning and not falling behind. I personally love having the weekly quizzes. I would choose a weekly quiz over a final unit test any day. And so it really helps me stay on top of my content and what I'm learning. For me personally, because we have the big lectures on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I dedicate every Monday, Wednesday, Friday evening to go over what I learned that day. So for me personally, I find it best when I study what I learned that day instead of going back to it a couple days later where it's not as fresh. So I'll use what I learned Monday and go over it Monday evening. And then when it comes to the test that we have on Friday, I use Thursday nights or Thursday all day to kind of go over all those summaries that I already made on the days prior and test my learning. So for testing my learning, I do use a couple different resources. I use Quizlet, which is really great because you can kind of make your own quizzes and then test yourself. Sometimes I actually just use physical, like pen and paper or cue cards, because when it is concepts that do require more graphics or more text, I just like the pen and paper method. And then I also use Chat GPT sometimes to come up with test questions. I think with all your resources, not just Chat GPT alone, it's also important to make sure that there's no discrepancies in the answers, or making sure what's actually getting inputted out is what you learned this week. So do make sure to go over that and review when using these online tools or online resources. But I mainly use the other days of the week to prepare what I learned the day of, and then I use Thursday to kind of summarize and test my learning.
Okay. So you did provide us an overview of what your week looks like. Can you
Mhm.
walk us through a typical day just so that we can get an idea of like how you manage your time and um, I guess how you do it all?
I'll go through Mondays because I personally really enjoy my system for Monday so far. So I wake up around 8 a.m. because we start at 10 a.m. And I'm someone who breakfast is my favorite meal. So I make sure to have a nutritious meal every single day before every single class. Even if I'm running late, I have to have a breakfast. So I wake up, I get ready for the day, and I eat my breakfast, and then I head out to school, which is just around a 10-minute walk for me. Once I reach school, I get into lecture. We learn from around 10 to 12. And then from 12 to 1, we do have a break. Some students go to the library, other students go outside, go for a walk. My friends and I have really dedicated that 1 hour to give ourselves a mind break. So whether we have a test or a quiz or an assignment, we use that hour as a break because we need it and we've all agreed on that. And so I really use that hour just to relax and not think about what I just learned and not think about what I'm going to learn next, but just to give my mind a break before I go into our next class. And then from 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, we have our foundations lecture, and that can go over different topics every single day. So sometimes we have shadowing. We don't actually have a lecture. So we get to spend from 1 to 5 going to different clinics, depending on what you signed up for. And we go shadowing instead of going into lecture. So this past Monday, we had our lecture from 10 to 12. I took a break from 12 to 1. And then we did have a lecture with one of our professors from, I think, like 1 to 4. And then one of my hobbies is going to Pilates. So after school on specific days, I make sure to attend my class because it's a great mental break for me too, and also getting my body moving. So every Monday I do go to my Pilates class, and then on Monday evenings I come home and I review my lecture from Monday morning, and I go over all the content that we learned that day. And then the last thing I do before dinner is I actually meet up with a couple of my friends and we prepare for clinical skills, which is on Tuesday morning. So this Monday evening, we actually practiced taking a geriatric history, going over falls, going over frailty. We practiced our cranial nerve exam, went over our OSCE checklist together, and then that really helped us prepare for clinical skills on Tuesday morning. Then I eat dinner and I try to go to be in bed by 11 p.m. to make sure I could be up for the next day.
It's nice that it's a late start.
Yeah,
Yeah, 8 a.m. classes are a little bit brutal, so that's
yeah.
so nice.
I am switching to 8 a.m. next semester for the small groups. So I thankfully have 10 all the way through Monday to Friday, but there are some people in my class who have 10, 8, 10, 8, 10 because they start
Okay.
at 8 a.m. for the small groups.
Does that mean that they get to finish their day earlier?
Yes.
Okay, that's really good.
Mm.
Um, so how do you maintain work-life balance? Because there's just so much material to cover, but you're also having to take care of your physical and mental health.
So for me personally, I think before even entering PA school, and this kind of goes back to I'm so happy I started when I was 25, is I really learned to prioritize certain things in my life. For me, breakfast, eating, having a good meal before I start my day, I realized how much of a difference it makes for me. So I make sure to do that every single morning. And just like little things like going to the gym, going to Pilates, meal prepping, cooking, making sure I'm still doing all the things that I enjoyed prior to starting PA school. I think the biggest thing for me with the work life balance or the work school balance while being here in Calgary is being far away from my family. I think it would be a different story if my family was just a couple minutes away or an hour away and I could go home on the weekends and then get to spend time with my family and friends. Because I'm all the way here in Calgary, the weekends, I really do just have to myself. So that's been great for me to, if I do need to catch up on school or if I just need a day to like stay at home and relax and rest and sleep in or do my extracurriculars, whether that's going to Pilates, meal prepping, doing stuff for our school club. So I think it is dependent for person to person. I am still struggling with being away from my family, which I'm very open about with everyone who I speak to about it because I think it's a really normal thing and it should be normalized. And so on the weekends where I do feel homesick, I do spend a lot of my hours just FaceTiming my family and my friends. And then whenever we do have a long weekend, I actually try and book a flight and go home back to Ontario. So for me personally, it's doing what I've loved before PA school and making sure that I'm still doing it while being in PA school.
That's really, really good advice so that you are still holding on to a semblance of yourself rather than just
Mm-hmm.
changing everything
Yeah.
about yourself. What happens in second year of PA school at Calgary?
Yeah, so second year PA school in Calgary, I think is pretty similar to the other schools where we have our clerkship year or our rotations. And so that is something I'm most excited for. For me personally, out of the 4 months of PA school I've done so far, my favorite days have been the days where I've shadowed. And so I just really like to go and apply what I learned in PA school and see it in real life. One of my favorite weeks we've had so far was the diabetes week, and during that week I actually asked one of our preceptors if we could if I could shadow her, if we could shadow her, and she said yes. And so during our dedicated shadowing days I actually went to her endocrine office and I got to see everything I learned about diabetes and apply it in real life, following her throughout her day, seeing different patients who have diabetes. So that was really fun. So our clerkship year is pretty much the same as the other PA schools in Ontario, where we go through, and Manitoba, where we go through different rotations for 4 to 6 weeks for the year. And then we do have electives for the last 2 months.
Have you put any thought into what specialty or specialties that you'd be interested in?
Yeah, for sure. I think I kind of had an idea before I even entered PA school because of my healthcare experience working at the family practice, working with internal medicine and the different specialties. I kind of saw where I may want to end up, which I'm very aware could possibly change once I enter clerkship. But so far, I have a really big interest in women's health. That was probably my favorite week so far, pregnancy and women's health. And so I do see myself working there if that's a possibility. I'm also really interested in fertility, so kind of tying in with that. And then recently, once I shadowed the family physician, I was like, wow, I could kind of see myself working in family med too. And then I also saw myself working in endocrine. So it's kind of hard, but so far, I think my top three specialties would be women's health, fertility, and family medicine.
Interesting. I thought I was going to go into pediatrics.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, and then I did the rotation. It was completely different. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting that you'll get a taste of all the different specialties. And then I
Hmm.
guess depending on what's available and how you interview, deciding where to work afterwards. So
Yeah, for sure.
that's exciting. Are you excited to work as a PA?
I'm very excited to work as a PA. I think that seems so far away right now, which my classmates and I talk about all the time. It's like, wow, I can't believe we're actually going to be practicing PAs one day. But I think it's going to come sooner than we think. So I'm really excited for when that time in this chapter comes.
Yeah. And so when you tell friends and family that you have decided to pursue PA or that you're in PA school, I know that for me, my own parents were like, "Oh, you're going to be a medical secretary." So it took just a
Yeah.
little bit of education to get them on board. So
Mhm.
were they fairly accepting, or like what was that like telling them about your aspirations to become a PA?
Yeah, so for my family personally, I think because I also went through three application cycles, they were pretty aware of what I wanted to do by the end of it. I think the first application cycle, they may have been a little bit more confused and like, oh, what is a PA or what is this program, especially because it's so new to Canada. But by my third application cycles, you can ask my parents anytime. They're telling all their friends, all their family about the profession, what a PA is, and what program their daughter's in. So I think it's all about giving them the knowledge, giving the people in your life who don't know what a PA is the knowledge and letting them know more about our profession.
That's fantastic. So they're advocates as well,
Yeah.
essentially. Great. So we are
Yeah.
coming close to, I guess, the end of our time. I wanted to ask you one final question. What advice would you give to applicants for PA school in Canada, given your experience of multiple application cycles and just
Yeah.
persisting?
Okay. I really love this question. And even any chance I get to speak to like pre-PA students or even when I was in the biology club and I got to mentor first and second year students, this is like one of my favorite things to talk about. I think the most important thing to remember when you're in PA school is this is a very individual journey. It's really, really hard not to compare yourself. I know I went through it, especially when I didn't get in my first cycle. And so remembering that your path is unique to your own and just to be very true to that. And everything you do, every healthcare experience, every course you take, everything you're doing it because you want to, but not because it makes you that cookie cutter applicant. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing, and you don't need to compare yourself to what other pre-PAs need to be doing. It is a very individualized journey, and people come from all different backgrounds, and it's really important to remember that who you are and be true to that.
Fantastic. And if someone's struggling with like a lower GPA or they're concerned that their healthcare experience isn't as good because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they're comparing, what would you
Yeah.
suggest in that specific circumstance?
Mm-hmm. So I think for the GPA aspect, there's so many different things that could play a part and play a role in that. I have some classmates who actually went and did a master's after their undergraduate degree. And then I have some classmates who went and retook courses if they wanted to upgrade their GPA. I retook courses. I think it's very normalized. There's no stigma around wanting to increase your GPA. And if you have the ability to, if you're still in undergrad and you have the option to, then just know that you can always go back and do those little things to make a difference in your GPA. And it's not an end all be all once you have your final GPA, once you graduated. You can always go back, take more courses, do a master's if you want, or whatever else you think would strengthen your application. In terms of healthcare experience, I think depending on the school, it just really depends on if they require or recommend paid or volunteer experience. I think with volunteer experience, it's really great to reach out to local hospitals that are in your area. For me, when I was in Waterloo, I just applied to volunteer at the hospital that was in Waterloo, and that was something I was doing once a week for the last 2 years or the middle 2 years of my undergrad program before COVID. And then in terms of my healthcare experience, I kind of just went on Indeed, applied to different jobs. Once I got my first job at a family med practice, it was kind of easy to apply at the optometry clinic and the internal medicine clinic. So I think my biggest step for, or my biggest advice for the healthcare experience is get your foot through the door, and everything else after that will follow.
Fantastic. I often tell pre-PA students that applying to PA school is like having a part-time job.
Yeah.
If you're not already working full-time or in school or managing other family responsibilities. So do you, I swear this will be my last question.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have about managing all the different moving parts of applying to PA school, especially if you're applying to
Yeah.
multiple schools?
Yeah. So my first year of applying to PA school, I was still in my last year of my undergrad degree. I was doing my thesis project. It felt like I had a million things on my plate and I was struggling. Looking back, and like maybe that's why I might have not been successful with my application that year. I had so many things on my plate. I was juggling with a lot of things. I may have not given my application its all, or may have been due to other factors. But I think over the years, I've always had a lot on my plate while applying to PA school because the last 2 years I was working full time. So I think when it comes down to it, it's really just setting these personal deadlines and making sure that you know what each school requires and trying to meet those requirements to the best of your ability. Because I was applying to 3 schools, I had all 3 schools laid out on Excel sheet, what they require, what I've already had done, and making sure that I'm meeting those deadlines well in advance of what the school's deadlines were. So make those personal deadlines, have your checklist, and do whatever you need to do to make sure you're on top of the game before the school's deadline, because they think submitting your application prior to the deadline will give you a lot of personal relief and not having that stress of waiting till the last minute.
Yeah, sometimes we need a little bit of pressure, and so
Yeah.
that's the way to go about it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. This has been incredible. If people had additional questions, what's the best way to get a hold of you or to contact, um, I guess the best way to contact you if they have questions.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm always open for people emailing me if you have any questions. I know I connected with so many PAs during my three application cycles, whether that was through Instagram, through Facebook, through email, through virtual shadowing experiences, whatever it may be. So I want to do the same to all three PAs who may need any advice or help. So you guys can always contact me through email. My last name is pretty long, so I'll just like send it to you. And if you we can put it up on the screen, that'd probably be easier. And you guys can email me any questions you have, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. And then hopefully in the future we can all be colleagues.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and it was so great to be part of this interview. I know during my application cycles, I watched these interviews all the time, and I found it so helpful. So I'm so excited to be on the other end of it and actually getting interviewed years later.
Yeah, you've come full circle.